G'day and welcome back to another episode of Sabina Park Farming and Contracting. On today's episode we've got to have a look at the brakes on the drop deck. About 2 weeks ago I thought that I had an issue with them not releasing, but it turns out that this is what's known as an emergency relay valve, and I couldn't actually find any information on it and how it works. Scrolled through YouTube and found in a Bendix pamphlet, after about an hour of searching, one little line that explains how it works. So I thought that I would break it down, show you guys what it does, how it works, and then that way anyone that's interested in these systems or hasn't seen it before has an idea of how they work. So here we go. This is our drop deck, which is hooked to the Mac. And it is a 1984 Kruger drop deck. It has had its 4th axle added on before I purchased it, but it's still only rated at 20 ton on the deck, so it's still only rated as a try, but it's a lot more stable. I didn't know that, and having known that now, I probably wouldn't have purchased it. I would have just purchased a try or spent the extra money and bought a proper widening quad axle, but we've got it. It works well. It's nice and stable. So I'm going to now set you up on the drop deck as a bit of a workbench and get the bits and pieces out and pull it apart and show you how it works. So this is one of the ones that's currently under there. There's 4, one for each axle, and it's actually quite an old system according to the guy at Truckline, our local truck dealer. It is an ABC, which is Australian Brake Corporation, and then the part number is 101197, which doesn't mean anything to anybody, but just for reference for those who may not know. So under the top here, I've left it all loose for ease of disassembly. Okay, so basically what you have in this top compartment is your service air from your truck brake pedal comes into this T-piece, which feeds in here and acts on the top of this piston. Top of this piston has this little plate which acts on, should have had this disassembled before, which acts on this piston valve, whatchamacallit, here, and that sits in there like so, and it acts on this valve, which then directs air through the intake from the tank through this channel passage here, which goes through there, and then when this acts upon it, see if I can do it by hand, it allows air to bypass past this little seal in the top, come up through here past this plate into the top of this brake chamber, and then it feeds, basically it comes up, out, and then down through these ports to your 2 brake hoses. Now what I thought was the problem was that every time the truck aired up the trailer, it was getting air straight from the feed and the reservoir into this top here, and I thought maybe a seal had let go, but all 4 of them were doing it, and that didn't make any sense, because normally if one fails, it's only one that fails. So checked all the seals, they were all fine. Checked this, it all seemed to work properly. What we found is that when this is back in here and all the way up, this was acting on this component, and it was actually pushing it down slightly, which was allowing air to come through from the reservoir up and into the brakes and putting the brakes on. What I finally found after that hour or so of searching, as I mentioned earlier, is that that's how it's designed. It's designed as an emergency brake, and that when you lose pressure from the service or your truck brake pedal, it is supposed to allow air through this little check valve, and normally there's an emergency line that feeds it, and that's how it actually gets activated. In this case it's blanked off because these are just being used as service brakes, not park brakes and not emergency brakes. But in essence what happens is it feeds air through until the tanks reach 60 psi. Once the tanks reach 60 psi, the air that is in this chamber and acting on this actually pushes this whole mechanism back down against this spring, which will be set to 60 psi, pushes the whole piston down like so, and that allows this part here, which is being acted upon by that, to actually, this moves down to seal that off. And at that point it exhausts or dumps the air out of the brake cylinders and out of the exhaust port, which is down the center here, and out of the bottom like so. And that's just a little ladder rubber. So there was actually nothing wrong with the brakes, but because I didn't know entirely how they worked, I spent about 4 hours stripping them down, diagnosing them to find that there was nothing wrong and they should be working how they were, thinking that they wouldn't work because this was acting on that, and thought that this might be a little bit of an eye-opener, a bit of a informative lesson for those that maybe don't know how they work. Now then, all the new trucks from I think 2016 on have, to my knowledge, by law got to have ABS units on them. This is a 1984 model, so ABS wasn't even a concept to my knowledge back then, although Formula 1 may have had it, I don't know. They seem to have everything. But this is quite an old style design. You won't come across it a lot, but if you do, and like me, you don't know how they work exactly, then this might be handy for you. So this was originally in the emergency, which is actually a feed from the truck to release the brakes. So I'm going to put it back all exactly how it was, and you can watch while I do that. Probably just be a little bit of a montage. I'm going to put it all back together. I'm going to then put it into the drop deck, into the back. It's in the rear axle, and then I'll start the Mac up, and hopefully it all works. If it does work, like I assume that it should, then I'm going to have to race into town and grab a bit more hose, because what we found is we've had a new kingpin that has been welded into the drop deck, because in the eastern states of Australia they all run a 2-inch pin. This one was a weld-in pin. You get weld-ins, you get bolt-ins, and you can run collars, but they're actually illegal to run. So we have done it all properly. We've got a 3.5-inch pin, which is what Western Australia uses, and it's a bolt-in kingpin. So if any time down the line it needs to go back to a 2-inch pin, you just unbolt the flange with the pin in it, and you can bolt a new one in. If the pin wears out, you can do the same thing, unbolt it, just replace it. It is a KT hitch pin setup. But anyway, what happened was, during the welding, we got an external company to come in and weld them. When they welded it, the heat from it actually melted the hose that feeds the service brakes. So what happened was, and started the whole problem, was last time I went to use the drop deck to pick up a caravan, the brakes would slowly work their way on, and what was happening was the tube had shrunk to such a size that it took about 15 minutes for the air to come up, because it was only feeding such a small amount of air. And then when you did use the brakes a few times, the brakes would actually come on and the air would be low enough that it would be activating this valve and putting a little bit of pressure onto the brakes and dragging the brakes. So there's nothing wrong with that. Hopefully, I've replaced a section of the hose, the worst part, but there is another section that needs replacing, so I'll be replacing that from the local guys in town, and hopefully that fixes all the issues with the drop deck, and then I can go out and pick up this triaxle tipper that Dad's found on my next break. So we'll be doing an episode about that, but for now I'm just going to put this all back together and clean it all up. And I even brought all my tools with me so that I look semi-professional, like I know what I'm doing. And then we'll test it, and you guys can watch the brakes coming on and off with any luck. So here we go. I used a lot of brake and parts cleaner. This is just a petroleum jelly. Nothing special about it, just to help lubricate the seals when we first install it all. This is the little emergency valve that I was talking about, and basically what happens is when you hit the emergency brakes in the truck, air would normally get fed from here. It would then come do a right angle up this tube, which would then act on this little spring and check valve, feed air in there, which then acts on that mechanism that I showed before and activate the brakes if there's no air in the system. And this is a Loctite product, Loctite 567 thread sealant. There's a 577, which is your high temp hydraulic. This stuff works for both, and I think works better, sticks a lot better, and it's basically like your plumber's tape, Teflon tape, whatever you guys like to call it. It sets, and it's a very nice product to use. We use it a lot at work for hydraulics and airlines and stuff like that. It seals brilliantly. Even if you've got a little bit of a gap, it still seals really well. I'm putting the feed back into that emergency port, because that's where it was. I think it would work fine both ways, into the reservoir or the emergency ports, but it was in the emergency before, and the way that the hoses have been routed, there isn't actually really enough play to put it in the reservoir side. It can be done, but it's pretty tight, so I'm just going to put it back how it was, how it was working, and it should be fine. Old Butterfinger's over here today. Right, that's all assembled. Now we'll try to put it in the truck. Hopefully there's enough light in there for you to see what's going on. Okay, so here we are under the drop deck. That is the reservoir tank. These are your service hoses. This one comes from the truck, from the brake pedal. This one goes on to the other 3 tanks at the front. 3 tanks? Yeah, 3 tanks at the front. This one has got the T-piece fed into it because that way I don't forget which way the hoses are hooked up. So it can only go one way. And now I'm going to put it all together and then we'll test it. Always get rid of the first little bit of goo in here, because 98% of the time it's got attracted a little bit of rock or stone or dirt of some kind, which probably isn't a good idea when you're trying to seal something up. These have got what's known as olives on the end of them. It's a little tapered bit here. Not sure if the camera picks it up or not, but you don't need sealant for that because the little taper seals against itself. Don't have to do them overly tight. If you do, you end up damaging something anyway, so. Air leaks are one of the banes of my life. I hate leaks. Air leaks, oil leaks, doesn't matter. I hate them with a passion. Right. I don't actually know the reason why they crossed these hoses over. None of the others seem to do it actually, so when I got here they were crossed over, but I'm going to hook them up how I think they should go. Makes no difference, they're all in the same chamber. There you have it. Right, I'm going to go start the truck and hopefully, fingers crossed, it all works. Okay, so hopefully there's enough air in the truck now. I'm just going to go push the button in, and hopefully you can see what happens as it fills the reservoir, and then as it comes up to that 60 psi, the brakes will be on, and then once it hits that 60 in theory, then the brakes should come off again. So, here we go.
A few moments later.
And there you have it. It's hit at 60 psi. It's come loose again. Now obviously I've loosened these off just for the video so that you can see the movement. I will be tightening them back up again, so anyone that goes, your brakes are too loose, your brakes are too loose. I know. It's just for the video. So I'll be tightening them back up, and then that's basically how an emergency relay valve works. The air comes in, as soon as air starts entering the reservoir, it goes straight to the brakes, activates the brakes until you get your minimum of 60 psi. And as soon as you hit that 60 psi, it acts on that little piston and pushes it back down, closes it, and exhausts a little bit of air that's in the brake chambers back to atmosphere, and the springs then pull the brakes back off the shoes. So that's it. That's how those brakes work. Hope you learned something. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, like, thumbs up, whatever it is. Subscribe if you want to see more of this. I'm going to go into town now and get this other bit of hose that's missing. That'll finish that job off, and then in one of the next episodes we're going to grab this triaxle tipper, and also coming up we will be grabbing a couple of other bits of plant that I've bought, but we'll keep that as a bit of a secret until we go pick it up. Thanks for watching, and hope you have a great day. Hope you have a blessed day. Cheers. Should we go? You don't need to be seeing all of that. Okay, take two. I forgot to hook up the hose at the other end on the other tank. G'day and welcome back to another episode of Sabina Park Farming and Contracting. Today's a bit more of an informational video. I've got to have a look at... Start again.